Hoppe, I'm very glad to have the chance to have here. That this is a group of people to which I should not introduce him in a very lengthy manner because all of you know him, know his works. So I will just leave it at that. Tell you again, I'm very glad we have the chance to have him here, and I will just give him the floor. The pretext of today's talk is the book on a theory of socialism and capitalism. So, Professor Topan, please.
Thank you, Cristian, and thank you, Tudor, and thank you, Vlad, for having me. It's a pleasure. It's my second trip to Romania. I think the first one was about 15 years ago, something like this. Little insights, in a way, are simple insights. Just think of the famous argument that Mises developed about the impossibility of calculation under socialism. Once you have heard this argument that if you don't have prices for factors of production, then you cannot compare input and output prices, and you cannot determine whether you produced efficiently or inefficiently. And without private property and factors of production, you have permanent misallocations. Now, once you have heard it, it seems to be almost trivial. On the other hand, as you all know, the majority of the economics profession was not convinced of this statement until 1989, and even nowadays I have my doubts that many of them have grasped these simple insights. And I think that in my book, Socialism and Capitalism, there are also two important but also very elementary insights contained that was then elaborated by me in other works. I should mention that Theory of Socialism and Capitalism was my first English book, and being a speaker of German, you always had the habit of constructing huge, lengthy sentences, sometimes half a page long. I did some translating myself from German to English. Richard von Striegel, a book on capital and production, and literally every sentence was half a page long. And in English, you simply cannot write in this way, so you had to break these sentences down into a large number of sentences. So this is definitely one of the weaknesses that I still had in this book, that my sentences are exorbitantly long. That has been gradually improved in my later works, but I should warn you, this is something that Germans suffer from, this problem. In any case, the two main points that I developed in there and then later on in other works, one is an economic point, and the other one is an ethical argument. Let me start with the economic point, and as I emphasized, a very simple one. The question is simply, how can you acquire wealth, and how can you become richer? And there are two ways of acquiring wealth and getting richer. The first way is what I call the productive way. And there are three simple principles involved. The first way of acquiring additional wealth, becoming richer, is you engage in what is called original appropriation of goods that were previously unowned. So we begin, so to speak, with the beginning of mankind. There's just one guy out there, and how can he get richer? So the first thing is he recognizes there are outside some things that he regards as good for something, and he brings them under his control. And obviously he does this only because he thinks bringing them under control will make me better off than I would be if I would not bring them under my control. That's the first way of getting richer. I should also mention that the first person who appropriates something that was previously unowned by anyone does not in any meaningful sense take anything away from somebody else. Everybody else had the chance to appropriate that too. But they didn't recognize it, or they were at some other place. So nobody can claim in a way, this guy stole it from me. That would only make sense if somebody else had already control over it. But if it is a resource that was unowned before, this guy is wealthier than he was before, and nobody else is made worse off. You're all familiar with this so-called Pareto criterion that says, how can we improve social welfare given the fact that we cannot do interpersonal comparisons of utility? And the criterion then says, one person must at least be better off, and nobody else must be made worse off. So this original appropriation fulfills, the way I interpret it, fulfills this criterion. What is the second way to become wealthier is to then engage in productive activities. That is, use your own physical body, use those things that you originally appropriated, and then transform these materials into something that you consider to be a more valuable configuration of material than the point from which you started. Again, you would not produce in this way unless you thought the transformation of material was beneficial to you. It might, of course, be the case that looking backward, you come to the conclusion, oh, I tried to build this and then it collapsed on top of me and I was not better off, but I had hoped that I would be better off. So looking forward, any act of production is, of course, also enhancing the welfare of somebody, of the producer himself. And again, if we now look at what effect does this have on other people, we can say, if the producer did not, in the course of producing, physically damage what other people had appropriated, leaves the physical integrity in place, then we can say again, one person is made better off by this act of production. There is now a more valuable good in existence that previously did not exist. He is better off. All the rest of the people have just as much as before, provided that no physical damage has occurred to whatever they claimed as their own resources, which they had produced or they had originally appropriated. So that's a second way of becoming richer. And then the third productive way is to engage in a voluntary exchange. So what I have produced, I exchange against what somebody else has produced. And every voluntary exchange benefits actually two individuals, both exchange partners, otherwise the exchange would simply not take place. Again, of course, only ex ante, that means looking forward. Again, I can be disappointed about what I acquired. But looking forward, I expect to be better off giving up whatever I give up and acquiring what I acquire. And the other person must have opposite preference orders, but he must think of this exchange in exactly the same way. So again, we can say in this situation, 2 people are better off than they otherwise would have been, and the rest of the world has just all the goods that they previously had, so nobody is made worse in any meaningful sense. So these are the productive ways. And then there are, of course, unproductive ways of acquiring wealth. A person comes and takes away, either in full or partially, what another person has originally appropriated. In that case, we have a winner and a loser. And the Pareto criterion would not be fulfilled because we cannot make interpersonal comparisons of utility. If we could do this, of course, then the situation would be different. Then 20 utils accrue to me, and 50 utils are lost at somebody else, and we say, oh, okay, net gain of 30 utils or something like this. Since we can't do that, so all we can say is one person gains, the other person loses. This is not a change that fulfills the Pareto criterion. The same is true if somebody takes away what I have produced, or either, again, the whole amount or part of it. Again, we have a loser and we have a winner. Pareto criterion is not fulfilled. And finally, if somebody does not rely exclusively on voluntary exchanges, but forces somebody to engage in the exchange, then again we have a winner and a loser, and we cannot say this change is, so to speak, a change that fulfills the Pareto criterion. And by and large, all societies can then be, if you look at the classes of actors that engage in non-productive exchanges, we find by and large that there are 2 types. The first are the plain criminals. Everybody agrees that the plain criminals are plain criminals, that they obviously do not contribute anything to wealth, but redistribute it in their own favor. And then we have the second class of individuals that compose the state, which is an institutionalized form of taking away what productive people have done and using it for their own purposes. If we compare societies, then if we ignore for a moment just the plain criminals that exist in any type of society, then we can say the main difference between different societies is made up by the institutional aggressors and by the extent to which they interfere with the productive work of people who enhance welfare. And there we have degrees. Some societies, some states do more of that, and some societies do less of that. My students always complained, or sometimes they complained, that when I compared the United States government also with a gang, the gang of gangsters, I said, yeah, but that is, you can't say that, compare that with the Soviet Union or so. And of course, they are also good gangsters, or relatively good gangsters, and not so good gangsters. The example I always give was a friend who went to one of these ATM machines, and a mugger was standing behind him and asked him to hand over his 300 euros that he had gotten out of the ATM machine, and then my friend negotiated with him and said, you know, it's late at night, I still want to have a few beers, I'm now completely out of money, wouldn't you be willing to just give me a little bit back? And he encountered a person who gave him 50 euros back of the 300 that he stole before, and he was of course elated by this, because it might well happen that on top of it they kick your teeth out and break your kneecap, and and then I said, this is the difference between the United States government and the government that you had in Romania and in the Soviet Union. In one case, they give you a little bit back, and you are happy that they do that and that they don't break your kneecap as they do in other places. So this is this is, so to speak, the economic message of the whole thing. Now I come to the ethical message that is contained in there. So let me first make the point that if there were no scarcity in the world, so we would live in the Garden of Eden. In that case, it is impossible to have conflicts over resources. Everything that exists in superabundance, we don't need to fight over. We would not need a moral system, so to speak, if all around abundance existed. We can do whatever we want. It doesn't affect anybody else. Everybody else can just satisfy all of his desires, regardless of what I would do, so to speak. But even in the Garden of Eden, there's one thing that is still scarce, of which we do not have a superabundance, and that is our own physical body. So even in the Garden of Eden, it is possible that somebody wants to do something to my body, or I want to do something to his body, and then we have a conflict. And the conflict is a conflict over something that is scarce. There exists less of it than people might desire. I have not an infinite number of bodies. And in the real world, of course, there exists scarcity not just of bodies, but of all sorts of things. So we can say first a few words about what is the purpose of having rules of social norms and rules of social life in general. Because of scarcity, we need rules that allow us to avoid otherwise unavoidable conflict. Again, we can imagine, of course, that as if by magic, God had arranged the world in such a way that whatever I do is exactly what you want me to do, and whatever you do is exactly what I want you to do. In such a perfect world, of course, we also wouldn't need any rules. This is the perfect harmony has been instilled, so to speak, in our heads from the beginning on. But as we all know, that's not the case. Conflicts do exist, and the purpose of rules is to make it possible that conflicts that otherwise would be unavoidable, that those conflicts can be avoided. So now let me just introduce quickly the rules, and then I'll defend them, that would make it possible that conflict from the beginning of mankind can conceivably be avoided. And these rules are similar to the ones that I already touched upon when I talked about how do we create wealth. So the first one is every person owns his own physical body, has an exclusive right over his own physical body, can do with his physical body whatever he wants. Anybody else would have to ask permission to do something to it. The second one is everyone who is the first one to appropriate a good that was previously unowned becomes the exclusive owner of this good. Next one is everyone who produces something with appropriated means and the help of his own physical body becomes the exclusive owner of what he has produced. And finally, you can also acquire the right to exclusive control of scarce resources by transferring something from a previous owner to a later owner in the form of a voluntary exchange. Now, how can we justify these rules? If we take the first principle, everyone is the exclusive owner of his physical body. That is, so to speak, the decisive point. Now, whenever people have some sort of conflict, remember, we only need rules because we have conflicts with each other. Then, of course, what we can do is we can just talk about having a conflict. We engage in an argument. We can also imagine that people could not engage in any type of argument. But then we would only have fights in this situation. That either I kill you, or you kill me, or I do something to you, or you do something to me. But there is no talk about any of this. What we, however, can do is we can ask for a justification. Why did you do this? Are you entitled to do this? We can say yes, yes and no, and so forth. If we couldn't do this, again, we wouldn't have any ethical problems. We only have ethical problems because we can just talk about ethical problems. So we have a conflict, and now we discuss who is right and who is wrong. The discussion can also be, is there anything like right and wrong in questions like of this kind? But it should be clear that the starting point always has to be arguing. There's no other way that we can begin to build up an ethical system or to make a decision. There is no such thing as ethics. Even if we would come to the conclusion there is no such thing as ethics, as right rules and wrong rules, even that point would have to be made in the form of an argument. So that's why some philosophers have called this is the a priori of argumentation. You must start with this point. Nobody can just say, no, I choose a different point. Because if he says this, I choose a different starting point, he already admits that, no, this is, of course, the point from which we have to begin. And then we see that if we argue with each other, I say something, then you say something in response, I say something back, and so forth, and then we come to the conclusion either we agree or we don't agree, whatever it is, that underlying argumentation are certain things that are presupposed by argumentation. Arguing is not just free-floating sounds that go back and forth in mid-air. Arguing is some form of activity. It is an activity that is either interested in establishing, so to speak, a truth claim. Somebody says this is right and somebody else says this is wrong. Or it is a claim of just or unjust. There is such thing as justice, there is no such thing as justice, and so forth. So we are making truth claims. And what we notice, of course, is that arguing as a specific form of acting involves that I have exclusive control over my body, my brain, my vocal cord, and I allow my opponent to also make exclusive control over his body, his vocal cords, his brain, and so forth. And he then again in turn, by talking to me and listening to my point of view, again takes for granted that I have exclusive control over my body, and I only with my own means, with the means of my body, come to the right inside, and that my opponent only by using his own physical body comes to the right conclusion, or we both come to the conclusion that we simply cannot agree on this thing. But we do not fight. We do not use sticks or stones in order to make our argument. All we make is saying something and hoping that on his own he will come up with the right insight. So in this way we can say anyone who engages in any type of argumentation implicitly admits that all participants in an argumentation are the exclusive owner of their own physical body. And what comes when we come to the other rules, let's say, and recall the purpose of rules is to avoid conflict. So if every person is exclusive owner of his own physical body, then all conflicts can indeed be ruled out. Everybody recognizes this is his, this is mine. Only by invitation can I do something to him, and so forth. All conflicts, interpersonal conflicts involving bodies, could be avoided if people adhere to this rule. All conflicts can be avoided if we adopt the rule that the first appropriator of something that was previously unowned becomes the owner, because by appropriating something for the first time, no conflict arises. If we would have a rule, for instance, saying the second one becomes the owner, not the first one, then of course we would have a conflict. There's the first one is there, and the first one, of course, would protest the fact that the second one is made the owner. They physically clash with each other. And of course, the same then applies for voluntary exchanges and so forth. So again, not to just draw that out for too long. Again, I think the argument here, the moral argument that I do, is also a very simple and elementary one. Whoever and whenever we engage in an argument, then we implicitly recognize the right of each individual to be the exclusive owner of his physical body, and any other type of ruling could not be argumentatively defended without running into some sort of contradiction. Maybe one additional word. People might oppose this argument by saying, yeah, but people don't have to be rational and interested in argumentation. Now that is, of course, certainly true. But people who simply refuse to do this sort of stuff, we don't owe them an answer. Only people who engage in this type of activity deserve an answer. And if they engage in this activity, then we can give them an answer. That is, each one must be recognized as the exclusive owner of its own body. Otherwise, we simply could not do what we do. And it is also impossible to just argue that we don't have to be rational. It's like, as soon as you say we don't have to be rational, this guy is already committed to rationality. So the opponents of this argument would have to be just shutting up forever. So they would never have to open their mouths, never claim anything to be true and right and something that somebody else did as wrong. But if they would never ever open their mouths, never ever engage in any type of argumentation, then they are for us nothing else but stones and animals and whatever. That is to say, we don't owe them any justification. But if they do engage in these sorts of things, then we do have a justification for our fundamental norms. All right, that should be sufficient for introduction. Now, as I said, or as I didn't say, you can either take up some of these things that I said here, or you can extend the discussion to any type of other subjects as well. I'm always interested in a wide range of subjects, by no means exclusively to these abstract philosophical things, but whatever you want to talk about, please feel free to do so, and I'll do my best to satisfy your curiosity.
Thank you, Professor Hoppe. I guess for starters, I will just give the floor to the other announced speakers of today, and I should start with Emi Socaciu, which again all of you probably know, and he's the translator of the theory of socialism and capitalism in May. And he testified here about the length of
the sentences.
Of the sentences.
He already mentioned it.
Longer than half a page.
Oh no.
No, but I just want to first of all to thank Cristian Comănescu for the opportunity to translate this book, because he was the one commissioning the job to me. And I will just touch upon a few points, focusing mostly on what I see as the philosophical contributions of Professor Hoppe in this book, and maybe focusing on an evocation of what the experience of translating and discussing this book was back in the 90s when we did it. It's well, I'm disappointed to hear that you consider the style a weakness, because we made so much effort to translate respecting the style. You should have told us back then. But I just want to say I'm not sure, and I do hope that the translation does justice to the book. Because it is an experience, and I recommend you all to read also the book in English, because it is an experience in not only the clarity of the arguments and the soundness of the construction, but also in style, you know? Because this long phrase and the way in which it is constructed has a sort of philosophical perfume, I would say, that many contemporary works do not have. So it might be a weakness, theoretical weakness, but for the reader it might also be an advantage.
If I'm permitted to make one remark with this, yes, some of my German philosophy teachers told me, a real philosophy you can only do in German. So in English you can only do shallow philosophy. So to a certain extent I agree with what you said.
You do it in German, it's just with English words. It's a translation I did under Cristian's supervision back in the 90s. And when you're young, you always commit sins. And after a while, looking back, you are proud of some of the sins, and you are ashamed of other sins. It's one of the sins of the youth of which I'm proud to translate this book. And now, I just want to highlight 2 or 3 very important philosophical points that I saw in the book. First is the argument the theory of property rights, which Professor Hoppe highlighted here. I won't go again to the details, but I think the way in which it's constructed is not only highly original in the context, but highly productive for further developments. Because one of the things that is very challenging is the using of thought experiment to justify and to substantiate at the same time the theory of property rights. And one important thing about the mental experiments is that usually people think, well, in mental experiments you can do anything. You can imagine all sorts of universes, worlds, with no limits whatsoever, because sky is the limit for a mental experiment. What's very interesting and important in Professor Hoppe's experiment on the Garden of Eden is that you cannot do anything in a mental experiment. Even a mental experiment has some limits. And when you try to imagine a world without scarcity, what Professor Hoppe shows is that you simply cannot do that, because there are logical limits to what you can imagine, even as a theoretical tool. Because in the world purported to be without scarcity, there are still some scarce things, physical body and so on and so forth. And this is a very nice counter-example, and a very deep counter-example to the usual usage of mental experiments in moral philosophy, when different guys just think roles here, imagine all kinds of things, no limit whatsoever. They don't care about the logical limits to the interaction problems that the agents face in those mental experiments. Also, I think the idea of justifying the libertarian theory of property rights by showing that it is assumed by anybody who wants to argue against such theory is also a very powerful tool that we can all use when discussing with, let's say, not so libertarian-minded people. But I guess the development of this argument is, here it's only a sketch, and I would like to point to later work. I guess it was in Ethics and Economics of Private Property, where you develop the full-fledged performative contradiction argument. Here it's only a sketch, it's later developed on a full scale. And for those of you who would want to go deeper into this argument, I recommend also reading, and I'm sure most of you all already did that, the Ethics and Economics of Private Property. Also, I would like, I say something that maybe Professor Hoppe wouldn't necessarily maybe enjoy this very much, but one of the merits that I see is that this theory of property rights is one of the most powerful illustrations in the 20th century for a Humean account on the, and I want to put it very carefully, a Humean account on the function of norms, of rules. Not on the content of rules, yeah, but on the function of rules. So with this respect, I guess this argument recovers a very powerful intellectual tradition of Scottish Enlightenment. And it's again very important because the mainstream is to see norms, to see rules as either the kind of production of hopeful monsters, someone put it like moral intuition, or you have to posit all kinds of weird entities or faculties in order to show what rules are for. And for Hume, and also for Professor Hoppe, the rules are there to solve problems of interaction. It's nothing mysterious, nothing metaphysical about them. It's just to solve the problems that people face when bumping into each other in one way or another. And this I guess offers this tradition, this view of on the function of rules, offers moral philosophers, moral theorists, the sort of instrument and understanding of what morality is about that totally lacks, or almost totally lacks, in the moral philosophy of the 20th century. I mean, Hume was forgotten, and Mill, or sometimes Kant, won in 20th century with regard to the function, to the understanding of the function of rules. And this recovery seems very important for me. Also, I would like to point out very briefly on the powerful critique of positivism in the book, which again I think is very important because the scientific academic world, surely in economics, you'd be surprised to hear that also in philosophy, is dominated by some sort of allegiance to positivism, if not fully to a full-fledged version of positivism, at least to some mild or hidden versions of positivism. And the pointing out the risks and weaknesses of a positivist outline or underlying assumption for ethical and economic theorizing is a reminder that I guess we should bear in mind. And I would just like to finish. Again, we are in an economics institution, but I felt the need to address the topic of the philosophical contributions in the book, because I think they are very important and sometimes unfortunately overlooked by persons discussing the book or criticizing the book. And I just like to on a more personal note to say that it was, I mean, imagine the 90s in Romania. We all lived a bit then, some were more mature, some of us very young probably, but I think I would say I'm the second generation of Romanian libertarians after '89, with Cristian being first generation, he and some other guys, they teaching us and then propagating the ideas. But it was an experience. I mean, for the mental framework which was usual in the period, I remember when first going to Cristian's private seminar on human action. I was there in the corner and listened to the guys and reading the text, and I would say, wow. And then after a while, it was a private seminar with with the students in the philosophy department on the theory of socialism and capitalism. I guess you were there and Ionela was there. It was 95, 96, or later, a bit later. A bit later. But yeah, later, 98, 99. But again, it was an incredible experience, reading and discussing and having the feeling that, okay, we finally have the tool to answer the questions of our opponents in the classroom, in the beer house, because people talk philosophy in the beer houses back then. And that it was a very important experience, intellectually and personally, to read these books and get acquainted with these ideas. So that I would.
Before you say something, two remarks. The first is a biographical remark. My PhD dissertation was on Hume. So even though on his epistemology I had mostly disagreements with him when it comes to his moral philosophy and his insight into scarcity leading to conflicts requiring rules and so forth. In that regard, I did learn from you, and I have also quoted him in that book. The second, about your point, which I think was very interesting, that you don't have complete freedom, so to speak, in your thought experiments. Think of, for instance, about the thought experiments that John Rawls does, where people sit behind a veil of ignorance and then are supposed to reflect about what rules would be appropriate or not. Now, the people sitting behind the veil of ignorance, they are not restricted by any type of scarcity whatsoever. They have no scarcity of time, I mean, why do I need to contemplate what rules should be adopted? Then my answer would be, yeah, then I just keep sitting behind the veil of ignorance and never do anything at all. So only entities that have absolutely no resemblance with us could do what Rawls asks us to do, so that imagining us behind the veil of ignorance. The word scarcity does not even appear in the index of his book. In a world without scarcity, there's, I don't have to write a book at all.
Just one word. It is, however, an important distinction in the account of property rules in Hume and Hoppe. And for Hume, the account is evolutionary, while for you is counterfactual, which is a great difference, a very important difference. But yes, on the basic understanding of the function of property rules, I would.
Yeah, I agree. Kirsty, you were supposed to say something?
First of all, I want to thank especially Professor Hoppe here for his unflagging support. Not only, I remember when I was very young, first I read, not very young, but in the early 90s, I read Rothbard's Ethics of Liberty, a few shorter pieces by Mises. Human action was too big a bone for me. But then I discovered Hans Hoppe, and I wrote him, and he was immediately enthusiastic. He sent me books, papers, and then he came here. He always promoted I would almost say selflessly, the Mises-Rothbard paradigm ethics and economics. And for that, I think we must thank him. Then also about the book. This is a powerful book. I think it is some of like Stefan Kinsella, Professor Hoppe's followers consider it even the strongest book on this kind of a priori foundations of epistemology and ethics. And it is nevertheless very straightforward, very understandable for the young people. It has a great impact. And so it was one of the first books we wanted here to have translated. And I want to thank Emi Socaciu for his enthusiasm. He did it very quickly, very well. But then we had this, and he was very nice, he never was angry about this. We had this great difficulty to get it through. So it was much easier, for instance, to have Walter Block, his book, or even Mises, the Argentina lectures. But for some reason, even though this was one of the best translations we had, it was very difficult. And this is a good question. Why such a clear, straightforward, strong book covering epistemology, ethics, economics, comparative economic systems, has such a difficult time to get through? And I remember I was arguing with one of my history professors and speaking about the theory and the history of pure capitalism versus pure socialism. And he said, Cristian, everything you say sounds correct, but why doesn't it have more impact? And at that time I tried basically the Mises answer, saying that, well, it's all boils up to the rationality of people. If people are rational, they will accept it, if not. Well, just for, now I have this conservative answer that I know my teacher, who is now gone, would like. I will just give you two quotes. One is from General Robert E. Lee, who talked very rarely about why he thought that his fight for the Confederacy was the right fight, and it was closely linked to the prospect of the American Republic versus Empire. And he didn't talk much about this, although he was invited. And at one point he said, at present the public mind is not prepared to receive the truth. And why would that be? A conservative thinker who is also interested in Mises and libertarian principle, he gave this answer: people must be in a state of grace to listen to the truth, more especially when it comes as a remonstrance. So I think, we need to take into account some additional anthropological and perhaps even metaphysical presuppositions to make sense of both such explanations and praxeology and ethics. I won't insist on that, but if you wish to comment, if you have other explanations, I'm interested. Just very briefly, maybe one or two points about the book. So it goes, in a sense, far beyond than just establishing the first principle, so to speak, of economics and ethics, because it provides a kind of method for establishing first principles. And the method is this. The question is, what is presupposed in a certain way of arguing or doing things. It also covers, for instance, empirical science, because you cannot do empirical science without experimentation. But experiment presupposes some trans-empirical, if you want, assumptions, including and especially the idea of time-invariant causality. Because if you have event A following event B in a laboratory, it is just a one-instance event. If it is to have any meaningful significance across time, then you have to, if you have to interpret it as, if you can interpret it as an experiment, you have to presuppose time-invariant causality. So it is a non-empirical, trans-empirical, if you want, presupposition of the empirical sciences. So then we have, of course, Amy has already touched upon this, an additional, and Professor Hoppe, an additional axiom for the sciences of human action. Because, of course, we have to add an additional, so to speak, trans-empirical presupposition, the presupposition of human action. And that is because we cannot not act by, as Professor Hoppe would say, even by arguing against human action, we must act. So therefore we would be caught in performative contradiction if we would try to argue against human action. So therefore it is a necessary presupposition of all your theory of the human sciences. And of course there is this third element. What is the ethical presupposition of non-conflict? And I will not repeat it. Professor Hoppe has shown once again that it is basically the norms of libertarian ethics, self-ownership and homesteading. It would be interesting here, again as a challenge, to point out that perhaps the most, that there are very few people who have seriously challenged this argument, but where they have challenged it, and I think Stefan Kinsella has entered into the discussions with the challengers, they have usually challenged whether it is or not possible to make arguments without getting into self-contradiction by getting rid of the universalizability principle. And I would ask this question to Professor Hoppe now. For instance, if you have Rousseau, his island alone, is it possible for him to have, so to speak, autistic argumentation? So he argues but only with himself. So his universe of argumentation is a one-man universe, autistic argumentation. Now Friday comes along, but he is more interested in doing some experiments, treating him like another computer. He already has a computer, but he will need a better computer. He will never presuppose that he is a independent, argumentative agent. He will just maybe talk to him like he talks to his artificial intelligence computer. But he will always evaluate what he hears himself. So he is still an autistic argumentator. And I don't know if this would work, then of course the next step would be to restrict, for instance, to my tribe. I restrict the set of argumentators to my tribe. Can I do this without getting into self-contradiction? Now, I looked up what Stefan Kinsella and some of the remarks he makes, and on this I will close this question. Is, if you propose any non-libertarian norm, that norm must be non-universalizable and or fail to set forth a property allocation system that makes conflict avoidance possible. And this is true. So, if you want to propose a non-libertarian norm, you must even either make it non-universalizable, but again the question is, can I argue consistently without universalizing across all the human rational beings? For instance, just autistic argumentation. For instance, I believe I'm the Führer of the universe. In a sense, yes, the answer can be, then you pose only a technical problem. And this is true. But am I engaged in self-contradiction? This is the question. And of course, or by not making conflict avoidance possible. And his other interesting observation is rejecting universalizability means that any norm whatsoever can be proposed by simply making up a particularistic reason for it. So this is true. This is true. I can basically exclude whomever I want. At the extreme, I can include only myself if I want to conceive of myself as the Führer of the universe. No. But this is, and I ask this because it is very pressing question. We have these neoconservatives now who basically say you can torture, or the Führer of the universe can torture, he can kill, he can get rid of universalize another area. I get over economics because Professor Hoppe has already touched upon it. He will touch upon it again. I'm sure you all want to ask questions. But very, very often the question is asked, if you have the libertarian principles, what, for instance, if someone comes swimming to an island that is privately owned? I mean, this question, someone over and over again, this kind of question appears. And the owner will not let him on the island. Now, the assumption is that the only thing that matters is to enforce the two principles, the two libertarian principles. Now, this is, and I want to emphasize, is not what Professor Hoppe and Rothbard, his mentor, says. And just to give one quote, I have also from Mises, but I will just give one from Rothbard. In strict logic, libertarian political doctrine can be severed from all other considerations. Logically, one can be, and indeed most libertarians in fact are, hedonists, libertines, immoralists, militant enemies of religion in general and Christianity in particular, and still be consistent adherents of libertarian politics. In fact, in strict logic, one can be a consistent devotee of property rights politically and be a moocher, a seamster, and a petty crook and racketeer in practice, as all too many libertarians turn out to be. Strictly logically, one can do all these things, but psychologically, sociologically, and in practice, it simply doesn't work that way. So we have this classical, basically Aristotelian insight in the indivisibility of the virtues, of traditional virtues, which I think is underlying this insight. And the solution, of course, is exclusion. But the very same people who, ask this question, they don't want exclusion. And of course, exclusion would precisely work and does work under a private property regime, because we would of course be able easily to discriminate and exclude against antisocial behavior in a private property regime, as for instance the Amish do, as many, but this is exactly what these people don't seem to want, on the other hand, because when Professor Hoppe proposes to, by and large, as much as possible, approximate this kind of exclusion in the case of immigration laws, for instance, these are the same people who protest, and they would really perhaps hate Professor Hoppe, and this would be the second answer to my first question, most just for this. So I think I will close on this and just think that again, you cannot have it both ways. So if you really want exclusion of antisocial behavior, of declarations of war like this against the citizenry, like I mentioned at the beginning, whether or not they are self-contradictory, well, you have to accept the principles of private property and whatever approximation of them is visible under the political conditions we live in.
Yeah. Again, two brief remarks, starting with the last point. In my later works, I point out the importance of exclusion. I point out the importance of upholding bourgeois values, and I have made myself many enemies among the so-called left libertarians who came to libertarianism only because they think the libertarians allow them to do anything they just want, and are not aware of the fact that, of course, private property rights also include the right to exclude, for whatever reason I have to exclude people. And in my personal life, and I think if we ever want to amount to respectable, intellectually respectable movement, we have to be far more rigorous when it comes to treating left libertarians with the threat of exclusion. They exclude me from their circles, and I don't regret that at all. But I also want to exclude them from my circles. Groups that say, like the Cato Institute, for instance, are very much in favor of these anti-discrimination laws that you have in the United States, in most countries. Women need special support, blacks need special support, and so forth. And once you give in to this type of nonsense, there's no stopping point anymore. So all of these anti-discrimination laws, I think a good libertarian has to reject outright. Discrimination has costs. Yes, that's why most businessmen do not engage in discrimination that is not based on estimations of the productivity of a person. But it might well be, if I have an Italian restaurant, that I want all the waiters to be Italian waiters because my customers expect to hear Italian chit-chat around, and do not want to have a Russian waiter waiting in an Italian restaurant. Again, every businessman has to make this assessment on his own, but whatever assessment he comes up with the risks attached to it, he must be free to do. The other point about the universalizability. Now, first point I would make is this idea of speaking a private language cannot be maintained. I believe that if you look at the philosophical investigations of Wittgenstein, who shows, I think, quite conclusively that every language is, so to speak, a public language. We cannot even conceive of using a language that only we ourselves understand and no one else could possibly understand, because this person could not even know if he uses his own terms in the same way in the second instance, and so forth. We need, so to speak, control of the use of our language by physical interaction. So Wittgenstein has this picture of what does he call it? Sprachspiele or language games. So you learn a language by engaging in activities, and the activities and the language correct each other, so to speak. Then we finally know a kid understands what the term fork means or what the term knife means. So without tying our words back to some physical, visible things, there's no way that we could actually just communicate with each other. So anybody who does argue does address, so to speak, the entire world capable of engaging in these types of language games. So the universalizability criterion is already implied in the idea of arguing at all. We were also, when it comes to truth, it was like, okay, this is the book, this is a statement that claims to be true. We would also not say this is just something that is true for me alone or just at this moment. It is a statement that says, I think every reasonable person can in principle recognize that this is in fact a book, and it is not just a book right now, it remains a book also tomorrow and 1 week from now. A person who would take this position, say, yeah, but the universalizability criterion is not important, then he would have to take the position that he can speak a private language. He only talks to himself, but then he doesn't need to talk. Then he just simply hits people on the head. So those are the two remarks related to your comments. And again, any other comment, question, and so forth?
Yes, now we should go to questions from the audience and then the free flow exchanges.
What I want to ask Professor Hoppe is about the dialogue in economics among different schools of thought. For example, between Austrian economists and mainstream economists or econometricians. Is it worthwhile for an Austrian economist to engage in a scientific dialogue with other school of thought, for example, positivist? That means attempting to exchange idea about very narrow, sometimes not say technical, but very narrow issues, like for example the function of central bank or the proper particular policy. Because you exchange ideas, my feeling is that ultimately you become aware of moral and ethical differences, and this leads to the question whether the Wertfrei claim is really morally neutral. Because my personal feeling that even logical coherence, when you claim from the other party logical coherence, you almost claim a certain moral assumptions in exchanging ideas.
Yeah. So in this sense, logic also requires some sort of commitment to moral principles that you are consistent. I mean, some people just say, okay, just like yesterday I said this, tomorrow I say this, so what? If you say, but they contradict each other, then they say, so what? With people like that, of course, you cannot have a discussion because they don't adhere to these types of standards. Now, what the relationship between the Austrians and the mainstream people are concerned, yes, there are certain areas where mostly microeconomic issues, where of course there is agreement that what price controls do. There are very few economists who would have different opinions on price control. On the other hand, I always thought, for instance, something like minimum wage laws would cause unemployment. Again, the huge majority of economists, Austrians and non-Austrians, agree on that. But if you are committed to a positivist methodology, you can also find people who think that minimum wage laws actually increase employment. We just had one of these guys, what is Krüger, who maintains this position, has done some studies and found out that whatever employment indeed somewhere went up, despite the fact that they have minimum wage laws. He was just appointed to the Obama's economic advisory team. Chicago economists think that demand curves can also slope upward. It doesn't occur much, but it is conceivable. Again, we would of course think this is completely inconceivable. They misunderstand what the law of demand, the law of marginal utility and so forth implies. But the more general question, how do we deal with these types of people? And I think there I tend to think that there is some truth in the thesis that Thomas Kuhn had about the structure of scientific revolution. Now his thesis is, the view has always been, so somebody formulates a hypothesis and then it is tested and then people become convinced it is false, and then it is gradually we march up into the light. And he points out that historically at least that is entirely false. You can have all sorts of falsifying experiences and people still don't give up the idea. And what leads to major breakthroughs is the old generation who clings to their idea regardless of what the empirical evidence shows simply dies out, and another generation takes the field and the discipline in their hand. Now this has happened, so to speak, to the Austrians, because their view was in a way the mainstream view until the mid-30s. I mean, if you take a look at the book like Lionel Robbins' book on the significance, nature and significance of economic science. No, this is a straightforward Misesian book, and was used as the main textbooks for introduction into the method and methodology of economics. In the meantime, that is so far removed from what economists do, and what has simply happened is not that there was any refutation taking place, just new people all of a sudden did something else and the other people died out and just a few remnants were left over. So I think the only hope that we have is that something like that will happen again, and they will be dying out, and we will be taking over, and certain dramatic events can, of course, maybe help in this. I mean, it has definitely helped the Austrian school. First, that communism broke apart, and now that we have this huge financial crisis, which all the mainstream economists have admitted, we had no idea, we didn't see it coming. The Chicago economists' rational expectation people, it seems like that cannot happen because all the right information are already incorporated in the stock market prices and so forth. So how can, so it did not happen in their view. So that people are unemployment is just, no, they probably just wanted to take a voluntary vacation or something like this. So these events might help us, but we also have to be aware of the fact, of course, that the Austrian school is a dangerous school. Dangerous in the sense that almost all economists nowadays in the Western world are employed by indirectly or directly state-funded institutions, and practically all macroeconomists are dependent on Federal Reserve money and grants and invitations and so forth, with the exception of a handful of well-known people. All of them are on their payroll. And even though I'm not a believer in the Marxian idea that das Sein bestimmt das Bewusstsein, the being determines consciousness, yeah, but it has a little bit to do with it. If you know where your money is coming from, even if you realize that might not be right, then at least you shut up about that subject and study something that does not get you into trouble. So we are up against a group of people who command almost unlimited funding as compared to what we can offer. But I do not think, I mean, some Austrian economists think what we should do is we should infiltrate the universities and then publish in their journals. Only if we publish in their journals will we ever be taken seriously. I think that is just so ridiculous. I mean, so ridiculous. None of their articles we would accept in our journals. None of our articles they accept into their journal. We just operate side by side and hope that the circumstances will change in such a way that they will die out, and we will take over. What we have in favor of the Austrians is they can talk to real people. I mean, what we say makes, so to speak, sense. An educated layman can understand what the arguments are. Whereas if you have these mainstream economists, I mean, I had many people applying for jobs and then giving a speech. You know, at the end I could not summarize in 5 sentences what the whole talk was all about. I didn't know, I literally didn't know what the topic was, what the purpose of all of it was, and what the conclusion of all of this was. And there are increasing numbers of people who see that these people who just sit there on TV and make comments, that they are just bullshitters. After the stock market fell, then they say, oh yeah, that was because of profit taking. They didn't know that the day before that there would be the next day profit taking place. And how can profit taking be an argument for, because somebody must have bought the stock. So there were obviously, people took profits and the other ones took deliberately losses. None of this, I mean, this nonsense we have to listen to from day in and day out, and increasingly the reputation of economists is so low. Unfortunately, we are affected by this to a certain extent too, because when I tell you I'm an economist, they say, oh, but where should I invest my money? I mean, I have not the faintest idea where I should invest my money. But certain things, of course, we do know, and these mainstream people do not know. How can it be that an increase in paper can bring about greater prosperity for a society? Now, in plain words, this is what 98% of all economists believe. What is this quantitative easing? It's nothing else but belief that additional pieces of paper will cause prosperity to break out. And every child in kindergarten understands that that cannot be. But you never hear anyone in these talk shows asking this question. Explain this to me. So if I have 5, 6 people here and we have monopoly money and I add more to it, how can it be that tomorrow somebody will be richer? No explanation for this. So I think the mainstream economics is just hopeless.
So perhaps you wouldn't agree with Walter Block, who holds exactly contrary to remain in universities and learn Keynesian economics and critique them and publish in their journals.
I don't agree with Walter on that one. There are a few other things I don't agree with Walter. I mean, we are good friends, but when it comes to strategic issues, I see things somewhat differently than he does. Yeah.
What would then be the role of us here who teach at the State University? Should we quit?
Oh no! I wouldn't say that either. But I would not necessarily always encourage people only to have careers as university professors in mind. There exist other career opportunities too that
so
always should
competition
be.
Of
what?
You want the competition of ways to.
You can promote the cause in many different ways.
And all should be tried.
Yes.
May I ask you questions? First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Hoppe for being here. It's a pleasure for me to meet him. For your information, I asked permission of Professor Hoppe to translate one of his books, Economic Science and the Austrian Method. It's still going very hard for me because I had no time for this lately, but I would like to assure you that this project will be complete, and I'll let you know when the job is done.
Yeah.
Secondly, I have two questions that I try to answer myself. First of all is an applied one. How do we deal with the theory of property rights in family, the relationship between parents and child? For example, me as a father, in my relationship with my sons, when do they have full property rights on their own body?
I think they have.
And
I think the criterion that Rothbard gave is in a way a sensible criterion. I mean, obviously, we cannot say a specific age. We cannot say at 3, at 4, 5. That depends. The children are different.
Sorry. For a better understanding, it's the time when he is born, or he's in her mother. When he is unborn, but he still exists.
That's a tricky question. I do think that regardless of what your position is on should abortion be permitted or should it not be permitted, it can never be an issue that is an issue for the state. It can only be an issue for those parties that are directly involved. That is, the mother and maybe the father and maybe the grandparents and so forth. So it would have to be regarded as a family matter that should be disputed and decided within the family. To have a state law saying abortion is all right or saying that abortion is not all right, I think I would be opposed to any of these solutions. The matter has traditionally been handled within families. Pressure is generated on the woman to either not abort or to abort, and their decision, whatever the decision they come to, should be respected because it has been made by those people who are directly or indirectly affected by it. That would be my position on this. And we do not have to be able to decide all questions that arise in life. These lifeboat situations that people frequently bring, that you touched upon, somebody comes swimming across the ocean there and wants to crawl onto your island. Do you have the obligation to accept them onto your island, or can you say, hey, swim back where you came from? Yes, a person might have the right to say, swim back where you came from, but the consequences might be quite drastic. He might not be punished, but a person like this can be ostracized. Nobody might ever want to have anything to do again with a person that made a decision such as this. On the other hand, it might be an arch enemy who has previously killed my father, my mother, and now gets out of the water and wants to crawl onto my island. In that case, people might well see that's what he deserved, to get told, swim back where you came from. So not all One should free oneself from the illusion that all conceivable scenarios we must be able to hammer out an immediate solution to it. There is in a free society also a function for lawyers and judges. You bring your conflicts before third parties who command respect, and they come up with judgments that are in accordance with local traditions, regional traditions, and so forth. I have, again, coming back to the abortion case, there are very few opponents of abortion who would just go as far as to say, even if fetus is the result of a rape, the woman should be obliged to carry the kid until birth. Again, I have no clear-cut answer what the decision should be in this situation. This is something for family courts, family councils, and so forth to decide, but it is certainly nothing that should be a matter of state policy.
Can I take up just two phrases on this question? It's because it's a follow-up. It's a huge comparative advantage to be able, within the framework of property rights theory, to ask this kind of question, because if you would have been a Lockean, impregnating your person with a resource, you would rather have the problem that Locke himself had and had to solve somehow. Unplausibly he solved it, but he tried to. He was aware of the problem. If property is the result of irreversible mix of your person with something, if it's in these terms, then how come children are not the property of the parents? Because they are the result of in Lockean terms, of an impregnation, right? So they should be the property of the parents. So the comparative advantage is huge between asking how come children are not the property of the parents and asking when they are the owners of their own body, right? Maybe there is no definite solution, but it's an advantage to have this sort of questions within the framework and not the other sort of questions.
Yeah. One thing is, of course, it is decisive. Does there a parasitic relationship exist, or is a parasitic relationship over? Once they are born, the parasitic relationship is over. Before they are attached, biologically speaking, as a parasite to somebody else. So this is a decisive moment when the umbilical cord is cut, so to speak. Then the second thing is, kids, of course, are not, once they're born, certainly not produced by their parents in the sense that we produce a refrigerator or a telephone. Because we can always say there are goods that are appropriated, and there are goods that are naturally owned. Over my body, I have direct control. And every person has only direct control over their own body. I can have control over his body, but not directly. Only by using my body first. The parents have control over the kid, but no direct control. And who has direct control or indirect control? Direct control logically precedes, of course, indirect control. And that we have direct control, the proof is simple. I can say, I decide to lift my arm. I can make your arm go up too, but not in this way. I would have to lift it up. You are the only one who can just will certain things to happen with something which you are in a way tied as nobody else is tied. Insofar, the argument, yeah, but parents were impregnated, the mother was impregnated, and because of this, the child is, so to speak, the product, just like a telephone is a product of the telephone producer, does not work. If the telephone would, in fact, once it has been produced, then all of a sudden just call people up on its own and receive telephone calls without me interfering, then we would have to say, maybe the telephone is just also a rational entity, and we have to apply the same type of reasoning that we apply to humans too. In a way, our physical appearance is in a way completely irrelevant when it comes to what rights or not rights do apply to us. I mean, we can imagine that some entities come down from Mars who look entirely different from us. How would we decide that they are either like us or that they are wild beasts or automatons? And the answer is, we would have to try out if they can engage in some sort of argumentation or not. They might look entirely different from us. They might be 10 times as large as we are, or 10 times as small as we are, or have different hairdo, or who knows what. The decisive is, in fact, can they argue or can they not argue? Can they rely on the force of words, so to speak, in order to induce people to do certain actions and abstain from other actions?
So, can we conclude, for example, that there is a moral right of the parents before the private property of his sons over his own body? The moral right pre-exists of the privacy, right?
Yes, I agree, but in the sense that you say the libertarian ethics is only concerned with punishable offenses and non-punishable offenses. Moral things go beyond that and are punished in a different way. They are punished by ostracism, by not having anything to do with people who do such and such, by cutting them off from other ties, by boycotting them, by telling other people, this is a swine, how can you possibly deal with this person, or this is a really decent and good man, we should just help him out. So what the libertarian ethic does is so to speak, does not answer all questions that arise in life. It only helps us to make sense. Should this be punished? Or should this not be punished with physical threats? But coming back to what Cristian said before, yes, you can also be a libertarian not breaking any property laws, and still you can be the most unpleasant person that you can possibly imagine, with whom you never would want to have anything to do, and there exist quite a few of those.
You had a second question.
I have a second question. In our real world, I think, let's say, especially for Romanian society, there is no interest for speaking, arguing on a moral foundation. So, what's happened, or do you think it is possible to be changed, those principles, those institutions, fundamental institutions, such as principle of ethics or morality in a society? For example, let's say we live in a democracy, the God that failed actually, and the majority of us vote for other principles
to conduct our actions, other than the principles that we believe in.
Yeah. What do we do about these people?
What we do?
Yeah. Yeah, we just since we can't change it by flipping our fingers, we have to adjust to it as much as we can, or as much as is needed. Promote the idea that there is something wrong with it, and try to convince people that that is the case. We have no other choice.
Okay, I have some questions which complete your point of view.
How many?
And two, and they are implying some important political components. I hope it will not be a problem for you. I'm wondering, looking to the next year elections from United States, it's a very big possibility to have a Republican on the White House. In this case, I'm asking you, what do you think are the chances for the American government to become a little bit more libertarian, let's say? And if this is possible, what will then happening in the rest of the world, including Romania here? Will they become more libertarian, let's say?
Should Ron Paul win? I would say yes. But if you would ask me, will Ron Paul win? I would say he has no chance in hell. And since he will not win, it will have absolutely no effect whatsoever. You might. I'm even afraid that, given that there are major economic problems, the states frequently, in order to just distract people and make them pay attention to other things, there might be even more warlike attempts in the making. I'm very fearful of this potential attack against Iran, for instance, and it seems like almost all of the presidential candidates, except Ron Paul, who will not win, look with a sympathetic eye towards the possibility of an attack against Iran. So in this sense, I tend to be rather pessimistic also, I must say. Ron Paul has had a major impact in America insofar as he has made many people who previously never heard about these ideas aware of these ideas. But the numbers are still so small, and the numbers of the masses that get dumber by the year, and I think not only in the United States, that applies in Germany. And so yeah, I have the feeling the population gets more and more stupid from year to year. So that's why I cannot quite share the optimism that some of my friends display at various occasions. The optimism that they display has frequently the reason that they are engaged in fundraising activities, and if you want to raise funds, you have to pretend to be optimistic because the donors want to see some success, and the success should not be in 100 years for their grandchildren. They would like to see a little bit of success in their own lifetime also. So you cannot always take the optimistic pronouncements that you hear at face value. Sometimes I think the people themselves don't believe in it.
I already got all my answers. Thank you very much.
But I don't want to be too pessimistic either.
Okay, two more questions, and probably the last questions. If there is no other really burning one popping up.
Let me just. You see, there is a certain amount of personal enjoyment in the fact that you understand something, that you grasp something, and I think that should be sufficient for us to do what we do. I would do the same. I would do the same thing, even if I knew that it would have no impact whatsoever, because I think it is just the right thing. This is, I like the truth. I like to grasp what is going on around me and get a certain enjoyment that I can predict. Oh, look, this idiot, tomorrow he will do this idiotic action. And then I say, hey, I predicted it. He did exactly what I said, even though that was he did all the wrong things for all the wrong reasons and so forth. But it gives me enjoyment to see that I understand the world in such a way that I can sometimes sit in my chair and laugh. Look, exactly how I predicted. These people are even more idiotic than most people thought, but you had predicted it right. So.
Going back to abortion, perhaps all in this room, or most of you, are familiar with some arguments, Ethics of Liberty, the minute translation, which is not published yet. But right there, it's you can see an argument about abortion in this way. Cristian Comănescu. Is there any possibility to view this case in this way? The parents are directly responsible, and they are the main cause for the children's inability. So it will follow logic from here that you have to raise him until he gets a moment where he can advocate for his property rights.
Yeah.
So as to
And if you don't do it, then you have to make sure that the kid is offered
yes.
for adoption to somebody who would do this.
We agree with this thing. Then, if the parents are killers, remains this question: if the state should go there and restrict abortion or let it be. I mean, is it the state a criminal when he intervenes in abortion, or he only refrains another criminal from its acts?
But again, it wouldn't have to be the state. Every private person could do that also.
Yes,
right?
yes, but
Yeah.
what would happen if
With the state, the argument against the state would be because the state gets its funding, so to speak, in a criminal way. If a private person would prevent this sort of thing from happening, he would do it with his own resources. So it would be more moral if a private person would intervene in the way that you said, and the state would stay out of it entirely. Because after all, I mean, even the personnel that it sends in there to do whatever they do would be personnel that is funded by in an illegitimate way.
I mean, it's like inviting somebody on your boat,
and then you're dumping him off. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to view it?
Yeah, that is a violation of the contracts that, so to speak, exist.
How about libertarians working for the state? Are we in a situation of moral schizophrenia?
Okay. Yeah, I know. I worked for a state university too, I would say. No, I think this is you privatize stolen resources if you don't do anything that is itself objectionable. Then with the resources, then it is okay. For instance, I never taught in any of my classes that taxation is just. I always said taxation is stealing. The government is a criminal organization. They let me left me alone with that. If they would have told me, now you have to just teach this and that and say such and avoid saying such and such, then I would have been implicated in their scheme. I think there are very few professions where that is possible. A university professor is one of the professions where, at least in the United States, I think also probably in Romania too in the meantime, in Germany also. I mean, once you have the position, you can say these things and they leave you alone. In that case, since you do not know from whom the money was stolen, so to speak, and cannot give it back to the original owners of the money has been stolen, it cannot be traced back to where it came from, then I think it is legitimate to be a university professor and working for a state university. There is the private universities are in this regard no different. They receive, of course, government grants. They are governmentally licensed institutions. But then there might be also personal extenuating circumstances. In addition to this, when I was in Nevada, I was on the board of directors of a company, practically no payment, but he was one of the biggest taxpayers in the state of Nevada. He told me, look, I mean, I want you to do this sort of thing. So he covered my salary tenfold in terms of taxes. My parents, my grandparents were expropriated by the Russians in East Germany. We did not get our property back. The value of the property was about 10 million euros. We got 100,000 euros compensation for this. So I have many years where I can steal from the German government without anybody being able to say that you are stealing anything. They owe me so much money, they don't even know how much they owe.
You are the 1% in this. You got 1%.
1%.
And the last question, Octavian.
Thank you. Speaking of moral schizophrenia, I must confess I suffer a slight variety of this disease because I work as a academic scholar in the public sector, as a journalist, as a writer in the private one. So you should be aware of the fact that you speak with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm not very sure who's asking the question. I want to ask you one, I think, very tough question, the answer of which I'm very much aware of, at least I think so. But I want to ask it just for the sake of verifying my logic and my intuition. So the question is, I put it under the umbrella of free market paradox, and it says that how come that in the free market ideas are not capitalizing too much profit?
Because there's a crowding out effect. Too many resources are automatically withdrawn into opposite directions, and there's very little left over, but there is some. I mean, there are private donations. There are big donors.
But not so big.
Not
too big.
Yeah, not too big. Yeah. No, I think the best answer is there's crowding out effect. Yeah, I don't see a solution. The only solution is just to persuade donors that it is worth their money to support intellectuals, book publications, and so forth. That works better. In some societies in America, there is a little bit of a culture of this. It is very difficult in Germany, I assume the same is true for Romania, to find donors, sponsors. I have tried to build a little organization myself. First few years I needed considerable subsidies. In the meantime, it carries itself. I have enough people who pay me to come attend these conferences, and I have a few people who are so enthused about the whole thing that they give me sizable donations that allow me to subsidize students to come there for free or very small sums of money. So we have to try very hard to improve, but I agree, this is a toughie.
I just was wondering if the answer doesn't have to do who the money masters are. You know, if they are counterfeiters, they will systematically, direct the money, counterfeit money, to cover the counterfeiting. So political parties who want to counterfeit, protection to counterfeit, for counterfeiting, education for counterfeiting. But if someone like Hans comes along, how would you expect him to make big profits with his kind of message? I mean, as long as there is this institution in place, as long as the printing press is in place, as long as we don't have natural money.
Okay, on this optimistic note, we should wrap up our first event today. Of course, we have to thank Professor Hoppe for being with us here, and I have to remind you that we meet again at 18 100 hours, so this evening, right across the hall, and Professor Hoppe will give a speech then. So that being said,
it will be a speech about money and business.
On politics, money, and banks.
Thank goodness that I don't have to ask what the